Hey, this is Math Minutes Pro with Dr. Harrison. Today we will talk about how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, okay? Now, just want to say that we're going to first start out by talking about how you're usually given an equation in standard form of a quadratic. We will make a connection between our strategy and how we're using the zero product property. And I'll explain why it's called the zero product property, because actually the solution to the quadratic equation are actually referred to as zeros. And I'll explain that in this graph or the coordinate system that we have here. So let's go ahead and start with what constitutes the standard form of a quadratic. So, standard form of a quadratic can be written as a times x squared plus b times x plus c, and we're going to set that equal to 0. Okay? So, a represents the coefficient of x squared, b represents the coefficient of x, and c is a constant. This is a quadratic because the highest exponent of the variable x is 2. So we're going to solve a quadratic equation in standard form that is set equal, and it will not be set equal to 0, but we're going to manipulate it and set it equal to 0. All right? So let's go ahead and start with our first equation. We have here x squared minus 11 times x plus 19 equals negative 5. All right, now notice, like we said, we want this equation, we want to solve this equation when it's written in standard form. The only difference is it's set equal to negative 5 instead of being equal to 0. The way we can convert this equation to standard form is we're going to create a 0 on the right side. So the opposite of minus 5 is to add 5. Now we're balancing the equation. And whatever you do to one side of the equation, you do to the other. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. Draw that line. Of course, when you add down, that crosses out. We get x squared minus 11 times x plus 19 plus 5 is 24 equals 0. Now notice this equation, this quadratic equation, is in standard form. The coefficient of x squared is 1, even though you don't see it there. The coefficient of x is negative 11, and then we have a constant c, which is equal to 24. Now, our next step is we're going to factor this equation over here, and I'm going to use my graphic organizer to help us factor this equation. When we factor it, we're going to have something that looks like this, and it's going to be set equal to 0. Factor times factor equals product of 0. That's why it's called factoring. So let's go ahead and get this going over here. I'm going to use this graphic organizer to help us factor this quadratic. So we're going to factor x squared minus 11x plus 24 equals 0. So I ask myself, what two numbers can I multiply to equal 24, right? Okay. And those same two numbers can I add to equal negative 11? Put that right there. What two numbers can I multiply to equal 24 and add to equal negative 11? Okay, well, what are the factors? I'll just start. What are the factors of 24? Well, 6 and 4. 6 times 4 is 24. If I add 6 plus 4, I get 10, so that's not working. So it was a bit of a guessing check. Okay. All right, we need to get a negative in there, so I'm going to try negative 3 and negative 8. Now, negative 3 times negative 8 gives me a positive 24. That's great. Negative 3 plus Negative 8 gives me a negative 11. So I'm just going to say that's a check. All right, so what does that mean? We take this information and transfer it over here. So we're going to write x minus 3. That's where that negative 3 goes in here. And then x minus 8. That's that negative 8. We put it over there. Okay? So we're looking pretty good. We're almost there in terms of solving this equation. Now I'm just going to use another organizer over here and prepare to solve for x. So we're going to now use what is referred to as the zero product property. When you have your quadratic equation written where you have a factor times a factor equals 0, you're now using the zero product property. As you can see, set equal to 0. So when you have it in this format, according to the zero product property, you take this expression in here, x minus 3, set that equal to 0, and x minus 8, and set that equal to 0. Okay? So yes, you're right. It looks like we're going to get two answers. So now let's basic pre-algebra. We add 3 to both sides of the equation. That crosses out. We get x equals 3. All right, we've solved over here on the left side. Now let's solve over here. We're going to add 8 to both sides of the equation. That crosses out. We get x equals 8. So hence, we have our two answers. Our two answers are that x equals 3 and x equals 8. All right, so we have successfully solved this equation. All right, I'm going to go ahead and circle that final answer so that you know you do all this work, you want to know what the answer is. Yes, we have solved this quadratic equation by factoring, and we use the zero product rule right in here. Now, but what does it mean? Why is it called the zero product rule? Because the reason is because these answers, x equals 3 and x equals 8, are zeros. All right, so let me show you what that means. So let's say I'm going to do a quick sketch of graphing this quadratic. Okay, so let's say we set x equal to 0. All right, in this original equation right here, setting x equal to 0. It's already set to equal 0. We set x equal to 0. That would be 0 minus 11 times 0 is 0. That would mean, and if we made that y equals instead of 24, we would get y equals 24. Okay? So when x is equal to 0, then y equals 24. All right? So let's go ahead and plot that. When x is equal to 0, y would be equal to, let's say I'm going to make that 24. Okay? Now, we have our two values of x equals 3 and x equals 8. So let's say this is 3, and let's say this is 8. And if I were going to graph this, it's a parabola because it's a quadratic, a smooth sketch would give me something like this. Okay, it's just a quick sketch of the quadratic. So what's happening, these are called your zeros. Your zeros are basically the x intercepts. Okay? When y is 0, you get x equal 3 and x equal 8. Okay? So what's happening here is you have this parabola which is a quick sketch of x squared minus 11 times x plus 24 equals 0, where the zeros are x equals 3 and x equals 8. So where the graph intersects the x-axis, those are your zeros. It's called the zero product property because you use the zero product property to find the zeros. Okay? All right? So I'm just going to write when x equals 0, then y equals 24. And that's the y-intercept over there. All right. Very good. So we've successfully solved a quadratic. We took this original equation and converted it to standard form, setting the equation equal to 0. And then we use this graphic organizer over here to factor this equation, setting it equal to 0. We got x equals 3 and x equals 8. We illustrated the zero product property here. And then we explained why it's called the zero product property, because the solutions x equals 3 and x equals 8, they're actually called zeros. So I'm just going to write that on the side here. All right? They're called zeros. So, thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to check out my Patreon page in my video description below. On my Patreon page, you can get access to exclusive math lessons, study tips, live Q&A, and more. See you next time.